My name is Shannon Reed. I've been a wrestling fan since the mid-1980s. I consider myself a casual historian. I'm also a professional wrestler. This podcast is dedicated to wrestling's glory days. I'm talking about the NWA, Mid-South Wrestling, Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and more. Maybe you want to get extreme with ECW. Well, you can do it all right here on this podcast because we're going to have something for everybody. And yeah, we'll talk about modern wrestling as well. So tune in right here on Read This with Shannon Reed. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Read This with Shannon Reed, a classic wrestling podcast. This is a very special tribute to Brian Pillman edition, and I'm joined by two of my favorite people. First of all, the man you see next to me wearing the Shannon Reed t-shirt, which is available at prowrestlingtees.com/Shannon Reed, I will point out. This is none other than Aaron Haulman. Aaron is a longtime best friend of mine. We actually met through New Wave Wrestling magazine back in the mid-1990s, became pen pals because there wasn't a lot of people that liked wrestling at the time, and got to know each other, went to a bunch of shows. We've been friends for well over 25 years now. Aaron also was a professional wrestler as the Rugby Thug Trent Baker, former IWA Mid-South champion. He's been in the ring with the likes of CM Punk, Chris Hero, Road Dogg, a whole bunch of guys, Tracy Smothers, Blue Meanie. So Aaron, I'm happy to have you with us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My pleasure. So this should be fun. Thanks for having me.
All right. And then a man that doesn't need any introduction, but if he had one, it would be to be called the Yellow Dog, is none other than the grand historian from the history of WWE.com, author Graham Cawthon. Welcome back, Graham.
Thank you very much for having me. Had a blast the first time or first two times because those were two distinctly different days. And I'm glad to be back.
Yeah, and luckily we just happened to be wearing the same clothes on both of those days.
For very poor people, we just have the one shirt.
Yeah. Luckily I've had a little raise since then, got something new in the wardrobe. But you have the distinction of being the first 3-time guest on this podcast. All right. So you guys ready to talk about some Brian Pillman?
All for it.
All right. I want to kind of set it up to the people watching how we're going to do this. Last night, Dark Side of the Ring premiered, and we've all watched it, and we're going to talk about it later on tonight. We're also going to be joined by some very special guests throughout the program that we're going to get to as well. Had some technical difficulties to start things off with the video, so we're going the audio route. But I think, we have a lot to say about Brian Pillman today.
Well, it's probably my fault for buying a Google Chromebook out of the trunk of some guy's car, so I apologize.
I think I've seen that episode of Young Rock.
Touche.
All right. So I want to get started by asking you guys, first of all, what are your earliest memories of Brian Pillman? And we'll start with you, Aaron.
I think the first time that I heard the name Brian Pillman was in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines. I would see his name in the top 10 rankings for Stampede, and sometimes I would see him and Bruce Hart in the tag team rankings. But the first time that I actually saw Brian Pillman wrestle was probably most people in 1989 in WCW. And, Brian was always special to me because he was an Ohio guy, born and raised just like me. He went to school, Norwood High School, went to college at University of Miami, Ohio, of course, played for the Bengals. So I think even to this day, he's probably one of the biggest names to come out of the state, because at that time there weren't a lot of big names. There's more now, but so he was an Ohio guy, so I was always rooting for him, always hoping to see him do well in his career. And that's probably my earliest memories of Brian.
All right. How about you, Graham?
I can tell you the exact date. So So in 1992, I started watching wrestling, but I was only watching the WWF at the beginning, and it was a slow burn. So I'm watching, superstars and maybe an hour of prime time, and that's it. So fast forward a few months, um, the first time I actually watched WCW, like a full episode, beginning to end of WCW, was the March 27th, 1993 episode of Worldwide. And I remember that so distinctly, and we should all remember that so distinctly, because that is the episode where the Hollywood Blondes won the unified tag team titles from Ricky Steamboat and Shane Douglas. And at the very onset of my WCW fandom, I watched the Blondes with such interest. I hated them. They were very much, personality-wise, they were very much WCW's Shawn Michaels. Like, you just wanted to see someone smack them in the face. And so they were an early hook for me to watch something other than the WWF.
Gotcha. Going back to what you said, Aaron, first of all, I know that you've always had kind of a affinity towards people that come from your home state.
Oh yeah, and same with like in MMA. My favorite MMA fighters, Rich Ace Franklin, who's also from the Cincinnati area, like Brian, and so yeah, it's always cool to see people from your home state. And I live in Springfield, which is a little over an hour east of Cincinnati. So to see somebody that close to where you live on the national stage was pretty cool.
Right. And Graham, I remember watching the match that you talked about. I couldn't have told you the date and what episode it aired on. But one of the things I remember most about that match, and again, I haven't seen this match in almost 30 years, so it's going by memory, but I'm pretty sure that Steamboat took the pin in that match, which really surprised me because he was like a really top guy and Shane Douglas was very good and he had, kind of been taken under Ricky's wing, but I was surprised that they were able to beat Steamboat, I recall.
You're right, and believe me when I tell you, I do not have the date memorized. That's why I made a giant website that has all the dates, so I don't have to memorize them. But I can tell you, this is actually the week before WrestleMania 9, which is the first pay-per-view I ever got to see. So I was like knee deep into all things wrestling at this point. But I remember watching the match, and I knew Steamboat from Coliseum videos that I had rented to that point. But I remember even watching the match at that age going, oh yeah, the bad guys are totally going to win this. They're using a towel. They're cheating so good. They're totally going to win this.
Nice. So my earliest memories of Brian, it's funny because Aaron really hit it right on the head. I remember reading the name in the Pro Wrestling Illustrated magazines where he was a tag team champion with Bruce Hart and Stampede. This would have been around 1987, 88, and they were known as Bad Company. And so I would always see Bruce Hart and Brian Pillman, and there was two versions of Bad Company in 1988. There was the Stampede version, and then Pat Tanaka and Paul Diamond. So it made him kind of stick out to me. So he was always a name that I'd read in the magazines, but didn't really know a lot about until he showed up in WCW in the midway through 1989. And I remember the thing that really got me the most with him is just he had that great drop kick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So Pillman comes into WCW in 1989, and he gets the win over Bill Irwin at the Great American Bash, and pretty good match. And then he had only been there for a handful of months, and he's put into this U.S. title kind of mini program with Lex Luger that culminates with a match at Halloween Havoc '89.
Yeah, Luger was going through, obviously we're talking about Pillman right now, but Luger in '89 was completely on fire as U.S. champion and as a heel U.S. champion. And it was a great early spotlight for Pillman, to the point that people were dying to see Pillman win the title and beat Luger. But just the fact that he took Luger to such competitive matches 2 months in a row. So they did have it, but they also did the Clash the next month. Really put Brian Pillman on the map in terms of being a single star in the NWA.
Right.
Yeah, I think that just shows too that, yeah, like you said, they saw something in him, obviously, to put him in that spot so early in his WCW career. So, yeah, I think that just speaks volumes of the talent that he had.
Yeah, I know that 1989 was, most people would say it was Lex Luger's best year in the ring.
Yeah.
And his matches with Pillman were very good. And Pillman was, younger and just kind of coming into his own. And he really hung well with someone that was having a great year. And I feel like he really got over in those series of matches between the two. And then I think that the real next kind of highlight that he had, as far as a big moment, was in February of 1990. And I know they kind of briefly touched this on Dark Side of the Ring last night, when Brian Pillman wrestled Ric Flair on World Championship Wrestling. It was the first singles meeting between the two. And, they had a very good match, and it did a really great rating. And I'm going by memory, but I remember from the Jim Cornette Midnight Express scrapbook that I think it was the best TBS number since December of 1985. And so that's pretty impressive.
Well, it's really weird. You're right. That is a huge highlight coming off the Luger feud. But what happens in between? He has this great one with Luger. He's a U.S. champion, number one contender to the world champion. And then he's put with Tom Zink, who is kind of, just on the scene. He's only been there a few months. And yes, he has this match with Flair, but it's like, here's a highlight in between a whole bunch of stuff that really doesn't make sense in terms of building Brian Pillman. And I think you see a lot of that during his WCW run. You see he has these little moments of brilliance where someone can see, oh yeah, we this is a great opportunity, but then it doesn't go anywhere. A lot of stops and starts.
I know that at that moment, and I think Cornette mentioned this too, Ric Flair had taken over on the booking committee at that point, and he was really looking to build up the television ratings, and he started having matches with all kinds of guys on TV. If you look at kind of January through April, he had singles matches with Brian Pillman, Tom Zink, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson, and Tommy Rich. And this was the world champion. And I remember that the Pillman Flair match aired on February 17th, I believe, of 1990, because it was a week before Wrestle War Wild thing. And I remember when I talked about the great rating that Pillman and Flair did, it actually was beaten the next night by the main event episode, which had Ric Flair and Arn Anderson against the Rock and Roll Express. It actually beat the rating from the night before. So Pillman or Flair, after taking over the booking committee, really got those television ratings up. But you're right, Graham, because right when this Flair Pillman match took place, just like a week or two earlier, this U.S. Tag Team title tournament was started with Pillman and Zink kind of put together cold, and they would go on to win the tournament, beating the Freebirds in the finals.
Yeah, and like I said, you just look at Pillman's career over WCW, and that's all it is. He has these little spurts of, maybe we can build this guy to becoming like the number one contender, or maybe we can build this guy to being a singles champion, and it doesn't really go anywhere. And I don't want to jump ahead because we do see some kind of semblance of that, but it's so low level. And I just think, wow, so many wasted opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I know that we're going to kind of go through Brian Pillman's whole career, but just to kind of put it together, in kind of a bubble, I want to ask you guys kind of what your favorite Brian Pillman matches are. And we'll go ahead and start with you, Aaron, if you want to tell us your favorite Pillman matches.
Well, one of them is probably one that I think a lot of people would probably say was one of their favorite Pillman matches, but that was the one against Jushin Liger, Super Brawl '92, and I didn't watch it at the time. I wasn't watching WCW pay-per-views back then, but I had a chance. I probably seen it over the years through trading tapes and whatnot. And I just watched it the other night on the WWE Network, and it still holds up. I mean, it'd be 30 years next year, and the match still holds up. And another thing that I really liked about that match was just Jim Ross on commentary. He was just fantastic. Just the way that he would call matches as a sport, and he just gave so much credibility to what he was calling, and it just to me it just added to the match. And yeah, it was a great match. I also liked their Monday Nitro match that they had, the very first match on Monday Night Nitro. It wasn't quite as good, but it was still good. And I think the fact that they decided to have those two be the first match on the show, I think speaks volumes of what they saw in both Pillman and Liger. And so, yeah, those matches, like I said, they still hold up to this day.
Right. Graham, how about you? Do you guys some favorite Brian Pillman matches?
Well, like I said earlier, I love the Hollywood Blondes. I thought that their matches, especially against Too Cold Scorpio and Marcus Bagwell, as a kid watching that, I'm going, oh wow, like they could actually drop the belts to this team because they made them look so good. I love the match at Beach Blast against the Horsemen. But in terms of being a singles wrestler, Pillman against Luger, all those matches are really good. And Pillman against Barry Windham, that feud in '91, even though it's both of those feuds, really, you can't see Pillman getting the win one time during the whole stretch of the feud. But I thought they both did a lot for him.
Right.
Yeah.
There's actually one match I recall, and this sounds insane. It was in, and this is just touching on what you just said, Graham. I think it aired on World Championship Wrestling, and it would have been like June of '91, and it was, I believe, Barry Windham and the One Man Gang against Brian Pillman and somebody, maybe Sting, maybe Elegante. But this match only went like less than a minute, and Pillman, I recall him actually beating Barry in that match. And the reason I recall it is because I was such a Barry Windham fan. I couldn't believe that he lost that quickly. But other than that, Windham was winning every time.
Yeah, even the tape fist match, which was such a big deal.
Yeah.
Even lost that.
And when I talk about my favorite Pillman matches, like that match is going to come up. And I think that Super Brawl '91 has a lot of great matches. And I think that no match gets overlooked any more than the tape fist match between Pillman and Windham. It's like 6 minutes long, but they're really going at it the whole time. This feud had been built up. And it was just intense. They were fighting out of the ring. I always remember the finish where Windham hits him with the nut shot and hits him with the superplex and actually gets a clean win because at that time Windham was potentially going to head to the Bash, unbeknownst to everybody, as a challenger to Flair. But as far as my favorite Pillman matches, the go-to is always to say Jushin Liger, and there's a reason for it because it was a great series of matches that happened at a time where matches like that didn't happen all the time. the kind of high flying, out of the ring, Frankensteiners from the top rope, power bombs. Like, people hear power bomb, but you got to realize that in 1992, a power bomb was still one of like the most, devastating maneuvers, one of the most exciting maneuvers to watch. But Pillman had great matches with Luger. I really like Pillman and Z-Man and their matches with the Midnight Express. Probably I like the Capital Combat match the most because the Midnight win the belts from them, and obviously I was a big Midnight Express fan. But there's also some. Go ahead.
I was going to say Cornette in the cage.
Yes. And there's other matches too, like him and Buddy Landell had a match at the November 1990 Clash of Champions, which is pretty underrated, I feel. The 1991 War Games with the Horsemen against Sting and Pillman and the Steiners was, a great match. He had great matches with Brad Armstrong. And actually, one of my favorite matches that a lot of people don't talk about is Flyin Brian against Bad Street at the September 1991 Clash of Champions. It was the semifinals of the kind of a joke of a light heavyweight tournament where they just kind of threw them out there cold and said, here's the semifinals of the tournament. But they really turned it up and had a great match. And, just so many great matches to talk about. The Hollywood Blondes and their matches with Steamboat and Douglas. Pillman against Johnny B. Bad at Fall Brawl 95 was really good. And yeah, Pillman was just a really exciting performer at a time where not everybody had that kind of intensity that he did and the high level of athleticism.
So I was thinking about this over the past couple of days, and I really think that Pillman is like the blueprint for the modern day Daniel Bryan, except the modern day Daniel Bryan wins the world title at the main event of WrestleMania. Because, it's a different time and place. Brian Pillman, with his size in 1990, was only going to get to a certain point on the roster. Now it's not really such a big deal. But being that underdog that we all believe in, that we all just so hope and pray that he's going to win, that he's going to, beat the big bad guy, whether it be Ric Flair or Sid Vicious or Barry Windham or whatever, we believe in him. As a babyface, we wholeheartedly believe in him. And I see a lot of parallels between Pillman in like 91 and Brian in, say, 2013.
Right.
And I think if Pillman was alive today, if Pillman was 32 years old today, with the in-ring skill and the microphone skill that he had back then, he's a multi-time Ring of Honor World Champion, and he could main event WrestleMania.
And it's funny that he was considered a small guy at the time, because today he wouldn't be considered small at all.
Right.
It just makes me think of that whole light heavyweight division that they had in like 1991, which was ill-conceived and it was poorly executed.
But it was about building him. Like, that was the whole payoff, was to finally give him his day, and he finally wins a singles title.
Yeah, I just don't look at it that way, in the sense that he won the light heavyweight title, but it kind of buried him, though, to win that, because really Pillman was no smaller. He never seemed any smaller to me than like a Bobby Eaton or an Arn Anderson. Like, he didn't seem like egregiously smaller. And they put the light heavyweight belt on him, and he would wrestle guys like Brad Armstrong and Tracy Smothers, but he never was really positioned as a guy the level of, say, Steamboat or Sting or even Dustin Rhodes. Like, Pillman, if you watch the Dangerous Alliance wrestle, say, Dustin Rhodes and Pillman, Pillman's going to take that fall. And so I just don't. I think that in theory, it's like we're going to build a division around him, but other than the Liger series, which really was just a couple house show matches and one pay-per-view match, I feel like it was kind of a bust, and I think it kind of hurt him more than helped him.
But it really laid the foundation for that heel turn.
Yeah, I mean, with him turning heel on Brad Armstrong, and I think that was really kind of the catalyst to him. Because if you look at around the time that he turned heel, like if you look at that kind of summer of '92 to fall of '92, he was starting to fade a bit as far as like how they were using him. Like he was, wrestling guys like Greg Valentine on the mid cards and not always on the winning end of that. I think that heel turn kind of came at a great time. And I think it goes back to what you said, Graham, about the kind of start and stop pushes.
Right. And even looking back earlier, we were talking about the match with Flair in '90. So he has this great run with Luger. A few months later, he has this great match with Flair. There's really a lot of foundation there for this is going to be a guy that we're going to make a big star out of in, a year or so. What's he doing 3 months later? He's losing to Mean Mark.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just what it's like I said, he is a guy that we all believed in as a babyface, as an underdog babyface. At the same time, after a while, it's hard to believe in him when the company obviously doesn't. And, in 2 months, he's going to be back losing an opening match.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at it and how 1990 played out for him, I mean, they brought in Junkyard Dog, Paul Orndorff, Elegante, and all of these guys were pushed in front of Brian. Brian and Z-Man had a nice little run as the U.S. Tag Champs, but I look back and I'm like, what if Brian had been given a legitimate chance as a main eventer? Because I know that Lex was their guy, and because Sting got injured. But what if Pillman had really gotten a chance? Because the crowd did like him. I feel like he connected with the crowd pretty well. He, I think, had some of the same appeal Lex did, but with a more athletic, higher intensity, high-flying style. And Lex and Flair had been done back in '88 for, several months. And so Pillman and Flair would have been something really fresh.
Absolutely.
It's funny. I was watching this match the other day. I didn't watch too many Pillman matches to kind of refresh myself, but I watched a match he had with Rip Rogers on WCW TV in January of '91. And I learned something that I did not know previously, because I'm watching this match and Jim Ross starts talking about how Pillman will be facing Ric Flair in a special challenge match at the Clash of the Champions. Well, that never happened because Ric Flair ended up wrestling Scott Steiner.
Oh, the January '91 show.
Yeah. And this match was aired, I think, January 5th, it said on the date on the...
So it's before Flair wins the title.
It
would have been.
Possibly, and maybe it wasn't even billed as a title match. I remember Jim Ross saying special challenge match, so they may have, just changed plans real quick. And also, this is right when Dusty Rhodes came in as Booker to replace Ole Anderson.
That is such a strange time. You see guys show up and they have 1 or 2 TV appearances and they never come back.
And then there's guys who were on top in 1990, like Doom. And then they just get broken up a month after Dusty shows up.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Pillman really had those kind of start and stop pushes, and it was unfortunate. I beg you guys to think of anything really notable that he did in the year of 1994. I know he was a part of.
Shannon, real quick, I'm sorry to cut you off. I just found your match. I just found the Pillman Rip Rogers match you were talking about, and you are right, because apparently I have seen this match at some point. I actually made note of it. It's the January 5th, 91 World Championship Wrestling. It would have been taped in mid-December of 1990.
Gotcha. And I know a lot of people ended up actually kind of disappointed by the Flair Steiner match. Pillman probably would have been a better match that night, because I don't think it would have been as ill received.
Well, we had a Flair Scott Steiner match on TV in the fall of '90. And it's the strangest thing in the world, because Scott pins him 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, it was part of the Running of the Gauntlet series.
How many times did you see Ric Flair take a pinfall 1, 2, 3 on television?
It was a big deal, and it was a better match than their Clash match. And I remember always hearing that Scott Steiner felt like Flair sabotaged their Clash match. And to be honest, in all honesty, Scott Steiner in January of 1991 was a bigger deal than Brian Pillman. He was half of their hottest tag team, and really, and this isn't knocking Brian, but Scott Steiner was really a big star on the rise.
Yeah, I mean, he was essentially a Brian Pillman with 50 extra pounds to him.
Yeah. And the Steiners were also far more protected than Pillman was.
Yeah.
So, Aaron, what are your memories of the kind of time period that when Pillman was a heel and the Hollywood Blondes, kind of that era of Brian Pillman?
Yeah, I unlike Graham, I liked the Blondes. I thought they were kind of like the cool heels. Just their whole attitude and just their swagger, and I enjoyed them. And going back and watching a lot of Brian's matches, he just seemed more comfortable as a heel. And I think he enjoyed being a heel more, and it just I enjoyed the Blondes, but they weren't. They were together 6 months, if that. They weren't around long, but
right.
What they did do was great. I liked the feud with the Horsemen, the Flair for the Old. That was good. They were just, and then the breakup. I watched that the other day. Of course, there was Colonel Robert Parker kind of got involved and basically led to them splitting up. And I can't remember them having too many the Austin Pillman feud. I can't remember them having that being very long either. They had a few matches, I think.
I know they had a match on the November Clash of the Champions, but this was several months after the breakup.
Yeah.
But I think the breakup didn't actually air until Austin and Dustin was Halloween Havoc, and the story was Colonel Parker got him that match. So I honestly believe that the Blondes, maybe they weren't on television as much, but I think they were still technically a team. Maybe mid-October.
I feel like the Beach Blast match was the last time I saw them, because I feel like when they lost the belts to Arn Anderson and Paul Roma, I'm pretty sure it was Austin and Steven Regal.
It was.
As a makeshift team, and I don't think they ever teamed after that.
I'll tell you here in a sec. Talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. What you said, Aaron, about the brief run, when we watched Dark Side of the Ring last night, I remember telling Michelle afterward that Pillman and Austin were thrown together as a team around January of '93.
Yeah.
They didn't even become the Hollywood Blondes until March, and they were done by July.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, July or August.
Yeah. But that just shows you like the impact that they made in such a short amount of time, because people, even to this day, we're still talking about them. And yeah, I like I said, I wish, but I believe it was Cornette that had a good point. He's like, well, if they hadn't broke them up when they did, then maybe the future might have been different. I mean, obviously it worked out for Austin, and Pillman too. The Humvee accident, I'm sure we'll talk about that later, but I mean, that kind of changed everything. But yeah, the Blondes were great for the short amount of time that they lasted. And I know Pillman and Barry Windham weren't really together as a team long either, but from what I've seen of that, I enjoyed that as well. Even though they didn't really come off as a team, you know, but like the Blondes did. But I enjoy their work too.
Hey guys, I just took a look about when they actually broke up. It looks like their last match as a team aired the week after Halloween Havoc, and it would have been taped. It was the same taping where, I think the last taping was with them was October 4 of '93, and then they worked the European tour into early November.
Wow. It really shows how downgraded their push must have been, because I vividly remember in that fall period that the Nasty Boys were the top heel team, and they really didn't do anything that I recall between August and October.
Yeah, and the fact that the Nasty Boys were the top heel team with the Hollywood Blondes still around makes me angry to this day.
Who the hell would want to see the Nasty Boys instead of Pillman in Austin? I thought Pillman and Austin were a great team, and it's funny because when Austin on Dark Side of the Ring, he said he wasn't real excited for it at first. I thought, and I actually thought it felt like a step down almost for Austin, and I only say that because he clearly was positioned better than Pillman as a single most of the time, and I thought it seemed like, you know, he was teaming with someone that maybe was like a notch behind him as far as like push went, but I really think Pillman, you know, kicked it into high gear. It was never his fault. It was just, you know, his push. He had been wrestling Scotty Flamingo and losing not that long earlier, while Austin was, you know, television champion, feuding with Steamboat and things like that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they were a great team. I remember that when I started subscribing to like the newsletters, like the Observer and the Torch, 93 was always a battle between the Hollywood Blondes and the Heavenly Bodies as far as who got like the most votes for Tag Team of the Year.
Yeah, and they had it was an 8-man tag, right? The Bodies and the Blondes again, and Douglas and Steamboat. Yeah.
And I loved that match, and it was the week after Super Brawl, where they had the Rock and Roll Bodies match, and the Blondes had wrestled Eric Watts and Marcus Bagwell, which actually was a good match, you know, which says a lot for the Blondes. But that 8-man was such a treat. Like, I'm really glad that they did that, because I remember watching Worldwide, not expecting anything special. And then, you know, in the intro, they said, and in the main event, an 8-man tag is the Rock and Roll Steamboat and Douglas against the Pillman, Austin, and the Heavenly Bodies. And I was excited. And they, you know, they had a good match. And it was, you know, it was kind of a double count out, kind of no contest finish. And, but yeah.
You got it on free TV. Didn't even have to pay for it.
Absolutely.
I miss Worldwide.
They would have some gems sometimes. I remember that show so vividly. I remember that Robbie V wrestled Shanghai Pierce on that show. Because I used to record all this stuff and watch him back all the time. And I remember Robbie V got the win over Shanghai, and I was happy. And it's really funny that I bring this up now that I'm saying it, because I just tweeted last week that I had 5 podcast episodes, and Shanghai Pierce had been mentioned on 3 of them. And then he has been mentioned on 2 of the 3 that I've done since then as well.
Okay, I'm running on little sleep. I forget. Shanghai was Henry Godwin, right? Or was he?
He was Henry Godwin.
Okay, so Tex Schlesinger was Phineas Godwin.
Correct.
Okay, yes.
So this will be the 5th out of like 7 podcasts I've had that has had a Shanghai Pierce mention.
Now you have to fit it in every show.
It's going to be like it's going to be like the new Jimmy Kimmel, Matt Damon shtick.
Going back to Worldwide real quick. Yes, in 93, 92, all that kind of stuff, they had actual gyms. By 96, 97 and on, it was like they're drawing random names from a bag. You're going to see Dave Taylor against Psychosis. You don't know what the match is. That's what makes it crazy. You're going to see Randy Savage against Juventud Guerrera.
It was so weird. Yeah, like I remember there's a Savage Ultimo Dragon match on YouTube. Yep. And there was one that I remember watching a couple years ago. It was Greg Valentine against Bobby Eaton. And I remember watching it thinking, maybe Bobby will win this one because he, Greg was just kind of a part-time guy in for a few shots over a period of 6 months. And Bobby was always usually on the losing end, but I thought maybe he'll beat Greg, and I watch it, and sure enough that, Greg Valentine doesn't like to do jobs MFer, gets the win over Bobby.
Well, he didn't want to put over Sting, so I don't think he was probably keen on putting over Bobby, but I don't know. That's just my guess.
Yeah. This is kind of painful to talk about, but last week I go through YouTube often to see if like someone uploads any like rare matches, and I'll rip them and save them because I'm trying to build up my collection so I can never actually end up watching this stuff. But there's a house show match on YouTube with Brian Pillman against the Honky Tonk Man.
Oh no!
You do not want to know who wins this match.
I know who wins that match. That's a bad era.
It's not even like a dirty finish. I think Pillman goes for like a reverse crossbody off the second rope. Honky ducks, and then Honky just like covers him, and I think he yanks the tights maybe and gets the pin.
Oh wow!
Yeah. And that's what I'm saying about 1994 was really a weird year for Pillman because I think he was in like the Super Brawl, like Thunderdome cage match thing they did. Mm-hmm. But 94 is like, he's not buried. Like he'll win matches on TV. Well, I mean, okay, he's buried in the sense that he's made to seem completely insignificant.
Yes.
But he's not like losing on TV every week like a Bobby Eaton or a Mark Starr, but he's, he'll show up and win squash matches, but he does nothing in 1994.
Yeah. Well, I think during that year too, we saw a lot of Hogan's influence and a lot of ex-WWF guys come in, and it just seemed like the WCW guys, a lot of them kind of pushed in the background, and I think that's just what happened with Brian, unfortunately.
I think you're right, and '94 was not a fun year to be a WCW fan, at least for me.
Yeah.
I almost wonder if '94 is when he's having some trouble at home, just because it doesn't appear that he is working as frequently as he was previously. Yeah. So they blow off the thing with him in Austin, and he never, like, that's the thing. Once they broke him up, I'm all behind Flyin Brian, but he's immediately made to look like a dork, and he loses all their matches. Yeah. And then I'm skimming through the 1994 stuff right now, and like the biggest win of the year is maybe Bobby Eaton. He fights Triple H to a draw when Triple H is no one.
Yeah.
You still Terra Rising, or was this
Jean-Paul Levesque at this
point? Okay. That's a little bit of an upgrade.
Did he wrestle Regal at like either Slamboree or Spring Stampede to like a time limit draw? Maybe.
Spring Stampede. Yeah, they had a few TV draws building up to that.
So his biggest win in '94 was probably a time limit draw with Regal.
He took Regal to the distance. He took him to the limit.
Right.
And his worst loss was the Honky Tonk Man by far.
We don't even have to research that. That's just a given.
Luckily, hardly anyone's seen it.
Right. You can't push Pillman too hard because you got to make room for, Dave Sullivan. So then 1985 begins, and this, I remember because, again, Pillman was just like sporadically used. I remember one time they had him and Johnny B. Bad show up and wrestle Harlem Heat on Pro, and they got like a DQ win, but he would just like have matches. He had no storyline, no nothing. But then he turns into California Brian. What do you guys remember about California Brian?
I remember the song, his theme song, the Blondes Have More Fun. I believe that's what it was called. It was one of those very cheesy but like very catchy WCW themes from the early 90s. And yeah, you can get that stuck in your head for hours on end. I personally was offended that he was turning his back on his Ohio roots. No, I know it wasn't his call, I'm sure, but I think maybe they just thought, okay, he was a Hollywood blonde, so maybe we'll just kind of keep the California theme going. But yeah, to your point, he was just kind of floundering in the mid card, and I don't know if we were going to talk about having seen Brian wrestle live, but I'll just go ahead and mention this. I think the only Brian Pillman match I ever saw live was at the Great American Bash pay-per-view at the Hara Arena in Dayton. This would have been 95. I forget the exact month.
June. It was June.
I don't know if this was the first WCW show that I ever went to. I know it was definitely my first WCW pay-per-view. But the opening match was California Flyin Brian against Das Wunderkind Alex Wright, or Das Wunderpunk, Bobby Heenan called him. But it was the opening match, and it went fairly close to 20 minutes or so. And of course the crowd was pro Pillman, and it was a good match. I think there was one point where Brian got a little frustrated with Alex and started lighting him up with the chops. But yeah, he ended up losing clean to Alex Wright. And so, yeah, it kind of tells you where he was at in 95 as well, at least for the first half of the year or so.
Yeah, and I do remember that being a good match. I remember that kind of the consensus of that show was that the best match was either Pillman against Alex Wright or Ric Flair against Randy Savage.
Yeah, from what I recall, and it's been a while, but yeah, that's probably right. Yeah.
Yeah, and Alex Wright had been getting a pretty big push for quite a while, and then he lost to Arn Anderson at Slamboree, I recall, and that would have been in May, so probably the month before this. But he was still. I don't know if they just saw him as like a younger guy. He was a little taller than Brian, I think.
Yeah, yeah, he had a good frame, good physique.
Yeah, one thing I'll say is you mentioned the California Brian thing being kind of an extension of the Hollywood Blondes, and the way I saw it was Baywatch was really big at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that because I remember he had these like blonde hair extensions or whatever, and I think that it was kind of like his theme kind of had like a surfer, almost, I don't know.
Yeah.
It was really California-ish, obviously. So I feel like it was a play off of the Baywatch popularity too.
Well, he was on Baywatch.
Was he?
Well, I mean, I don't have all of this filed away in my memory, so I'm scrolling through stuff, just trying to jog stuff, and it looks like so like we were saying, tail end of '94, he's a non-entity. He goes away for a few months, so he basically takes a long Christmas vacation, comes back in January, and they start doing these vignettes of him where he is talking about his football career. He's talking about, moving past the Hollywood Blondes. He's making an appearance on Baywatch. And this is really interesting. He wants the newly announced WCW Cruiserweight title, which doesn't come to be for another year and a half.
Oh, wow. And then when it did get going, he was never, from what I recall, really involved in it.
He was already gone.
Yeah.
Did you know that there was another TV show around 95 that Pillman was on, and I don't remember what it was. It wasn't Baywatch, but I remember I specifically tuned in because it said there was going to be these guys on there. And basically, I think it was like a courtroom type show, but Dusty Rhodes was like the featured wrestler of the group, and basically he beat the shit out of Pillman and Marcus Bagwell in their scene. And I couldn't tell you what show it was, but Dusty, Pillman, and Bagwell were in it for one scene, and Dusty beat the shit out of both of them, made them look like jobbers. So.
I remember another TV show that Brian Pillman was on, Family Feud. I think it was 1990. It was like Pillman. I remember it was Brad Armstrong. Was Z-Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Sting, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember Pillman being on there. I don't remember how well he did. But everybody says he's a smart guy. Maybe it's on YouTube. Maybe we can find it. But yeah, I just thought of that when you're talking about TV shows.
And this is another thing I thought of. There was a video game award show in like 94, and I don't remember. I think it was on PBS.
Yeah.
But I remember watching it because I think I had gotten wind that there was going to be some wrestlers on there. Yeah. And they had Pillman and Lord Steven Regal on there, and they got in like a fight on stage. I remember Pillman like throwing chops, and I don't know what award show it was, but I remember I had recorded it, and yeah. So so the California Brian thing happens, and then not long after that, a few months after the Alex Wright match is when we get WCW Monday Nitro, and the first match is a match you mentioned earlier, Aaron, where, it was kind of a cool way to kick it off, to bring back the Liger Pillman match, which I think really set the tone for what Nitro would become, which is, as Eric Bischoff likes to say, they were like the car crashes in the middle of the movie. They were the action.
Yeah, I think it set the tone for that debut episode. And so yeah, I think it speaks volumes of how they thought, or what they thought of Pillman and Liger as wrestlers, and that they would put him in that position.
And I think, Pillman, he became a horseman. He started teaming with Chris Benoit, and they had some good chemistry together. I remember they had a match with Scott and Steve Armstrong on Worldwide, and it was really good because the Armstrongs were always a great team to work with, and Pillman and Benoit had a lot of good team chemistry.
Yeah, I kind of compare that to what we saw later with Benoit and Mongo, with the roles kind of reversed a little bit. So in each case, Benoit is the silent one, and he has this really outspoken, flamboyant guy working behind him. But I thought Benoit and Pillman was fun, and I want to say maybe they had a match with Harlem Heat, and I was just thinking to myself, oh, I'd love to see the Horsemen win the tag belts.
Yeah. And then one of Pillman's other matches in late '95, and I kind of mentioned it earlier when talking about favorite Pillman matches, was when he wrestled Johnny B. Bad. And I want to go ahead and segue here to a video that was sent to us from Johnny B. Bad himself, Mr. Marc Mero. He was kind enough to send us a video since he was unable to join us for the show. And so let's take a look at that right now.
Memories of the great late Brian Pillman. Oh my gosh. Probably one of the best matches I ever had was at Fall Brawl against Brian Pillman. Now, the winner was supposed to wrestle Sting for the U.S. title. So it was a match that, everybody was really pumped up about. And we had to go 30 minutes. We pulled out every move that I think we knew. We pulled out all the stops, man. But the reason why that match was so phenomenal was that Brian orchestrated that match. He put that match together, and he just talked over with me, and we wanted to go out there and steal the show. And I think we did. I think we had one of the best matches. One of the best matches I ever had was against the great Brian Pillman.
All right, we're back, guys. What you think of that Marc Mero promo?
I thought it was cool that he took the time to send it to you, and he spoke highly of Brian, and I agree. I watched that match the other night, and it was good. I mean, it went 30 minutes. They did the sudden death overtime, and I thought that was one of Johnny B. Bad's better matches from that time period.
It would have been '95 that he kind of toned down some of the theatrics, and he started having some really good matches. Like, he had the great match with Pillman, and he also had a great match with Eddie Guerrero on Nitro that I remember. It went to a draw, if I remember correctly, and then he went to WWF as Marvelous Marc Mero. And I really think that '95 and '96 were kind of his peak in-ring years for me.
Yeah, I agree. I remember his early run in WWF when he was with Sable, and yeah, you could definitely tell he improved so much from when he first started. And the Johnny, I agree. I liked it when he kind of toned down the Johnny B. Bad gimmick, and maybe got a little more serious. And but yeah, that match with Pillman at Fall Brawl, I thought was really, really good.
But getting back to Pillman, so he starts doing the loose cannon thing. Now, what were your guys' impressions of the kind of the early stages of that loose cannon gimmick?
I appreciate it. I liked what he was doing. I thought it was a real callback to his persona when he was with the Blondes. Just, you wanted to punch him in the face. And this is before the Horsemen. Like, this is him and Arn, and they're working against Rick, and Rick is losing on television every week as a baby face, and he's just getting screwed every week. And then if you go back and watch that Halloween Havoc 95 tag match where the Horsemen come back together and Flair slugs Sting in the face, and you've got 3 Horsemen, and that the Joe Louis Arena pops. Oh, it's just such a great moment.
I watched back a Nitro match between those people, which would have probably been like the week prior, and it was Ric Flair and Sting against Pillman and Arn, and it's just like a kind of a 6-minute sprint, and the heels end up getting counted out. But I watched it back because I remembered, when I watched it in real time back in '95, thinking it was a really good match, and I enjoyed it again when I watched it this week.
Yeah, I liked the loose cannon gimmick. I felt like Pillman was kind of coming into his own at that time, and I mean, at one point, he was one of the most talked about guys in wrestling because of what he was doing in front of the camera and behind the camera. But I enjoy it. Yeah.
And if I look back at it now, my favorite versions of Pillman are probably the '93 era in the Hollywood Blondes and the early '91 kind of push he was getting is kind of the underdog babyface, but really he was kind of like probably 4th from the top at that point, which is almost as high as he ever got as a babyface, doing the feud with Wyndham. Those are probably my favorite periods. But I will say that at that time, I was never more into him than I was at the time that he did the loose cannon thing and showed up at the ECW arena.
Loose cannon Brian Pillman as a personality. At that point, there were too many dinosaurs around him, like the Hogans and the Savages and everyone like that. But today, that would have made him the biggest star in wrestling, bar none.
Yeah, and not to get too far ahead, but just listening to how that played out again, man, that guy was a very smart dude when it comes to working the bosses.
Even though Eric Bischoff still likes to deny that, he got Brian pulled one over on him, but
yeah, he's full of shit.
He's gonna take that to his deathbed. But yeah, I watched his debut ECW CyberSlam '96 on the network, so I got to see, and they didn't censor anything, so it was all how it played out, and that was great. The line was like, "You know what a smart mark is? A smart mark is a guy that spends his last $20 on crack cocaine." And I always thought it would be funny if he'd have said instead, "You know what a smart mark is? A smart mark's a guy that spends his last $20 on an RF video shoot interview." And not even a good one. Not even a good one, but like Abdul the Butcher.
On VHS.
I just thought that would have, on VHS. I just thought that would have been, it's like when he said, "I'm going to pull my Johnson out and piss in this ring right now." You're like, "Oh, he's not going to do it, but he might. You never know." But yeah, just and then he beating up the fan after the match. That was all good stuff.
Yeah, I thought that fan was legit and hated him when I watched it. When I watched it in the clip last night, but then he took that phony ass swing at him. I'm like,
yeah, I don't know if we'll ever find out who that guy really was, but
he did a way over the top swing at Brian.
Yeah, he did.
So that's when I was like, okay, because I hadn't watched it in 25 years. So
yeah. As far as the other, I really couldn't find much footage of his other stuff that he did in ECW. I know he never actually. I mean, I know years before he had a tag match, but I know he didn't have any matches in what, 96. I think but they were building like him and Shane Douglas, and I think did he sign? I think he signed with WWF or before that happened, or it fell through.
I know that they were building him and Shane, and yeah, he probably did sign.
Yeah, but yeah, no, that was some good stuff.
Yeah, and then unfortunately, he has the Humvee accident and signs with the WWF. And what are your guys' memories of him in the WWF?
Well, I remember the way that they introduced him to that press conference, and I thought that was really cool. And I thought, at the onset, this is not a continuation of Loose Cannon, but by the end of it, it is kind of a continuation of the Loose Cannon. So I thought that they had, inadvertently built him up so big during the tail end of his WCW run that I was completely invested by the time that he showed up in the WWF. And every time he was on television, it was very much, I was very glued to the television. I wanted to see more of him, and they were using him sparingly. I do remember that.
Yeah, I remember. I think it was King of the Ring when he kind of made his official debut and came out. And I believe Jim Ross interviewed him, and I just remember him saying, "Hey Jimmy, how's my extended family? I don't even like my real family." And then I remember when Austin came out, walked by, and they had that kind of Hollywood Blondes reunion for a split second, but I thought that was cool. And it was just so unfortunate though that injury happened and he wasn't able to wrestle more than he did.
Yeah. As far as his WWF run, I just largely remember him doing commentary. I do remember the deal with Austin, injuring his ankle, and I obviously remember the gun angle. But in all honesty, I was a big Pillman fan in WCW. I loved his work in ECW. And I do not look back on his WWF run fondly because I largely remember him as like a commentator that couldn't do what he used to do, and it just felt like it never felt like, okay, this is Brian Pillman getting his chance to shine. It felt almost sad in a way, like because he had the injury and he was just doing like, they throw him on Shotgun Saturday Night as a commentator, and it just didn't do it for me as a fan to watch him in that role. And I think that one of the things with Dark Side of the Ring is that, if he hadn't have had the Humvee accident and he had been able to go to WWF in 1996 as a wrestler, it would have been really interesting because he was still, somewhat in his prime. Like he had just had that great match with Johnny B. Bad that we talked about in the matches with the Horsemen, like 6-8 months earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I think his best and most memorable match in WWF was the In Your House Canadian Stampede, the 10-man tag, which I rewatched about 2 hours ago, and man, so hot just for the whole match, and Brian, he was involved in the match, and obviously, but it didn't, maybe not as much as he could have, if he hadn't been injured. But to me, the most memorable match he had in WWF.
I was always a big fan of, and I noticed that they really leaned toward his personality more than his in-ring, obviously because of the injury. So I thought that the stuff that he did with Goldust and Marlena was so fun. The match that they had at Ground Zero, which was after the match, there was a complete callback to when Dusty lost Sapphire to the $1 Million Man, and he's chasing after him after the match, and he runs into the where the car is parked just as the car drives away. I thought that was phenomenal, and I thought that the vignettes that Pillman did with Marlena after the fact were so much fun, and I hate that we didn't get more of that story.
Yeah, and I do remember, remnants of the Goldust feud. Didn't they wrestle at SummerSlam that year?
They did, and the stipulation was Pillman had to wear a dress if he lost, and he would have to wear it until he won another match, I think.
Yeah, and I just remember being just kind of indifferent to it, and it just it wasn't the Brian Pillman. Like, I'm not saying it was bad stuff. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the Brian Pillman that I liked was the WCW version, and then later the loose cannon version. But this just seemed very mid card and past his prime at this point. Like, I just remember feeling that he just seemed like a different guy, and it was almost like they were just struggling to find something to do with him. So it wasn't my most positive memory of Brian. But what did you guys think of the infamous gun angle?
I watched. I couldn't wait till he came back from a commercial break.
Yeah, I think it fit in the whole Attitude Era, which was kind of beginning around that time, and I don't know. Some people just really didn't like it. Me, I thought it was fine. Nobody. I did Pillman drop the F-bomb, if I remember correctly? Like, he said, "Get the F out of the way." I think, and I thought it got past the censors, but maybe I'm just remembering it differently.
Could be. I don't recall.
Yeah, but it was, for that time period, things were becoming more edgy, TV, music, pop culture in general. So, I liked it.
I liked it because, and I think this goes to him, and it goes to a lot of the biggest stars that have ever been. You can look at wrestling and go, that's fake, but then you look at this segment and go, this is real.
Yeah.
I just remember it kept my attention for sure, but I just didn't like it. I just thought the gun thing, I thought it was just too over the top. And I mean, they did way worse things than that as far as like, angles and stuff, but I just thought it was just a bit over dramatic, and what it felt like to me was just desperation. Like, a lot of the stuff that they were doing in like 97, 96, mostly 97, sometimes reeked of desperation, and that's what it felt like to me. But it definitely kept my interest for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So then we unfortunately move on to finding out that Brian Pillman passed away. Now, for me, I vividly remember because I didn't order all of the WWF pay-per-views at the time, but for whatever reason, I got Bad Blood from St. Louis, and I have no idea why I ordered this pay-per-view, because it was just kind of a random pay-per-view at the time, and nothing that really jumps out at me that kind of what made me purchase it compared to other shows. But I remember vividly watching the pre-show, and Vince McMahon comes on and says that Brian Pillman had passed away. And I just remember it, the whole night was just kind of a fog. I remember that Undertaker and Shawn Michaels had this really great cage match where Kane debuted, I believe. And I could tell it was a great match, but the whole mood was just shit because, Brian Pillman had died, a guy that I had watched for, 8 years and was young. And it was just a real, obviously, tragic thing to happen. What are you guys' memories of when you found out that Brian Pillman had passed away?
Yeah, I was the same as you. Watching the show and finding out that way, and just being, shocked that it happened, shocked and sad, and just and it definitely made watching the show more difficult. It really was kind of similar to a few years later when Owen Hart passed away. It's just it was just unbelievable.
For me, I didn't order the pay-per-view, and I did not have the internet at that point. I wouldn't get the internet for a few months later. So I remember watching Raw the next night, and by then, for a lot of people, it was old news. But it was just surreal, and I remember feeling queasy, and this doesn't feel. This isn't why I watch wrestling. This isn't fun. This is not an escape. And then, you're right. It's sort of nothing more than a precursor for Owen a year and a half later.
Yeah. So I think the next question that kind of begs asking is, what do you think would have happened with Brian Pillman if he had not have passed away? Like, where do you think his career trajectory was?
I don't know. I think it probably would have been about the same, really, because I don't think he was going to recover from the ankle injury enough to perform like he used to. So I think if he was going to continue to wrestle, he would have had to have been kept in the mid card. And then, I think at that point there's no way that he could have became a main event guy. And, at that point,
I don't think that he would have been higher on the roster in terms of being a wrestler. But I think, and it all goes back to that injury, had he not had the injury. But I think in that case, he had a huge opportunity on two fronts. One, he's such a good promo. And I think they could have done so much with him being a good promo, whether that be being a manager or whether that be, being the color guy on Raw. The second point being, I think of him having a brilliant mind for the business. If he wanted to. Imagine, in some alternate reality where Pillman retires his in-ring career in the WWF, maybe takes a year or two off, and then joins Paul Heyman in ECW. And then he gets groomed to be a booker. That would be fun. I would watch that show. And I would watch him doing something like that today. I would love to see his influence, his mind, playing with today's product and working with today's talent. I think that would be phenomenal. And I love, I just mentioned Heyman. Heyman has a huge, active, very visible role in today's product in the main event scene. He's not a wrestler, but why couldn't Pillman have done the same? Why couldn't Pillman have found that niche where he can attach himself to, the new up and coming star and take him to the world title?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting take. And when I look at his trajectory, I got to agree with Aaron about the injury kind of muddies the waters. Like it was going to limit his in-ring career. Like he was not going to be, main eventing WrestleMania, main eventing SummerSlam. And it all goes back to that accident. Now, if you take the accident out, I think that in some ways the sky could be the limit, because everyone knew that Austin was very talented and should be a top guy, but nobody expected that Austin would become Austin, right?
Yeah.
So with Pillman, he has the in-ring and promo ability to be a top guy, but who knows? Who knows if something would have connected in a similar way as did with Austin or, some of these other guys, uh, that were big at the time. So it's one of those things that, you'll never know. And unfortunately, that Humvee accident largely, ended his career in a lot of ways and probably his life because of the addictions that would come.
Yeah.
And I still think, going back to what I was saying earlier, if we don't have guys like Brian Pillman in 89 and 90 going up against Flair and Sid and Wyndham and the audience completely, getting behind them, despite the size differential, then we don't have the Daniel Bryans and the undersized guys who overachieve in a business in which their size should prevent that.
Right. And he did a very athletic style that was, somewhat innovative at the time because not a lot of people could do the things that he could do in the ring. Like he was doing the air Pillman, the springboard clothesline, and it wasn't too common for people to do stuff like that. I know Lanny Poffo would sometimes do like a springboard, but Pillman did it on, I think, a bigger scale in the sense that Poffo was largely a prelim guy that did that in the opening matches, but Pillman actually had some runs where he was, featured in big matches doing those things. Looks like we got another video that was sent in to us with someone sharing their favorite Brian Pillman memories. Let's hear from a good friend of mine, Mr. Jimmy Calhoun.
Hey, Shannon. It's Jimmy here in Ferrum, Virginia. My favorite Brian Pillman memories. Well, first off, when he first got to the NWA, he came out to Def Leppard's Rocket, which immediately scored super points with me. But if I had to pinpoint something that really stood out, it was his feud with Jushin Liger over the NWA light heavyweight title. I really loved that title. I loved the energy that was in that feud. Those two put on some classics. The only promotion that I've ever really seen to really elevate the light or the light of the junior heavyweight title has been Japan. And I could often wonder and just imagine what Pillman could have done with that title and his career had he spent some time in Japan. But anyway, loved Pillman. Hate he's not around anymore.
All right. Thank you, Jimmy Calhoun, for sending in that video. I'm also a big Def Leppard fan, and I always appreciated the fact that Pillman came out to rock it. And I actually liked all of the theme music that Pillman used. I liked his generic instrumental that he had in 90 to 92. I liked the Hollywood Blondes theme. California blondes have more fun. It's not as bad as the American Males theme. There's something, I mean, who doesn't like him short, like him tall, like him big, and like him all,
Yeah, I always thought it was cool when guys real songs like New Breed coming out to Beastie Boys and stuff. So stuff like that, sets you apart from other guys, and it's just a good song too.
Yeah, I remember. Obviously, I was not watching at that point, but in 06, 07, right around there, I would started getting DVD sets of these old years of wrestling, and 89 was one of my first gets, and I would sit there and watch the vignettes for the guys that were appearing soon, and the Pillman video with him in the helicopter, and I was like, holy crap, this is real music. They did one on the skyscrapers. I really love that aspect, and that was a great way to introduce him.
Yeah. I know we kind of maybe skipped over this a bit to some extent, but I want to talk about any live event memories we have of seeing Brian. Now, Aaron, you mentioned that the Alex Wright match at the Great American Bash was probably the only time you saw him live. Is that correct?
It's the only time that I saw him wrestle live. The only other time that I can recall seeing Brian in person was at a WWF house show at the Nutter Center in 1997. And this was the closest that I ever got at a WWF show. We had second row on the floor. So that was just, I got front row for a WCW house show. I think it might have been the same year. Never got front row for WWF, but Brian did a run-in, and I believe it was during Steve Austin's match. I can't remember who he wrestled, but of course that got a big pop from the crowd because Cincinnati's near Dayton, so and I don't think anybody was expecting it either. So yeah, I believe those are the only two times that I can recall seeing Brian in person.
Gotcha. How about you, Graham? Did you get to see Pillman much as far as live shows?
Well, unfortunately, for the majority of the Monday Night War era, I lived in a state that did not get live wrestling, that being Anchorage, Alaska. Yeah, so I never got to see him live.
I saw him live as Flyin Brian on a few occasions. The one that sticks out the most to me is one that I talked about on a previous podcast I did with Graham. It was in March of 1991 at the Civic Arena in St. Joseph, Missouri. And for weeks, they would do the advertisements for the show coming up, and they would run down the matches, Sting versus Ric Flair with Elegante as the special referee, da-da-da-da-da. But they advertised that there would be this six-man tag with Wings and the Junkyard Dog against the Freebirds and Dan Spivey. And so I'm like, well, who is this team known as Wings? Because they haven't wrestled on television. They didn't say who any of their names were. And so I went to the show that night not knowing who was the tag team known as Wings that would be teaming with the Junkyard Dog. And it turned out that Wings was Brian Pillman and Owen Hart. This was when Owen had like a cup of coffee in WCW, wrestled some squash matches on TV. And it was really weird, like in a sense, because they gave him a tag team name. So I always thought it seemed like Owen was just in and out. Like you knew this was going to be just a short thing. And the fact that they gave him a tag team name indicates to me that there was an idea for them to be a real tag team. And I mentioned something on Twitter yesterday about it to Dave Meltzer, and he responded that they were actually named after the TV show Wings.
This is a great show, by the way.
I never watched it, but I always remember it like being on. But yeah. Who thinks to name their Pillman and Owen tag team after a sitcom?
Can we name this show after Perfect Strangers?
Now I love me some Perfect Strangers.
Don't be ridiculous.
All right. So now that we've talked about some live event memories, such that they are, because we don't have a ton to really speak of. So Graham, what were your thoughts on Dark Side of the Ring last night?
I enjoyed it, but going in that it's not going to be a happy ending. So it's fun to relive the good times, and I think you get a broader perspective of what was going on regarding the bad times.
Yeah. It certainly was not a feel-good show. I thought it was very well done. There wasn't a ton that I really didn't know. I didn't know that Cornette was the one that got the phone call that Pillman had died, or that he was the one that first found that out. And I think I maybe had heard the story before about Pillman approaching Vince at that convention, but I didn't immediately recall it.
Yeah.
How about you, Aaron? What were your kind of thoughts on the show?
Yeah, it was kind of similar to what Graham said. There were certain things on the show that I didn't know about. Like I knew that Brian's relationship with Melanie was tumultuous, to say the least. I wasn't really aware of Brian's marriage to Rochelle, and that he had a daughter with another woman. So a lot of that, and then like Rochelle killing herself. That was that was all. Yeah, the episode overall was dark and it was depressing at times. I think there was a little kind of glimmer of hope at the end with Brian Jr. And that I think maybe he'll have his future now is going to be a lot better than it was probably looking earlier in his life. And so I'm happy that he's on the right path now, and I hope that he can avoid some of the same demons that his father had. I think it's good that him and his mother are at least talking to each other. I'm sure that relationship still needs a lot of repair, but at least they're on speaking terms. And yeah, it's just very unfortunate that Brian had the Humvee accident. I think things could have been a lot different if that hadn't happened. I think that really was kind of the beginning of the end for him, unfortunately.
Yeah. My kind of thoughts on the show was Pillman's original wife, the one that committed suicide. I thought that was probably the most tragic thing of all in the whole show, because she was someone that was married to Brian and had a good life, and then things just kind of got turned upside down through no fault of her own, and then just a bunch of unfortunate happenings, and it's really sad that it played out like that, and with her having children and all of that. And then I did like, it seemed like Brian's sister was a really great source of support, and really would have probably been a great mother figure to the kids. But yeah, it's really hard just hearing about what happened with the first wife, and then Brian with his addiction issues at the end after the Humvee accident. I really enjoyed the hearing from the Bengals strength and conditioning coach. He was pretty good, and I thought Meltzer and Cornette were both good on the show, and I always enjoy listening to those guys. And as far as Melanie Pillman, I was first of all, I was like floored when I saw her.
Yep.
Yeah, like I think we all probably thought the same thing when we saw her. Like it was just just such a shock. Mm-hmm. And my thing with Melanie is like, she obviously made a lot of mistakes, and did a lot of bad things. But she's also suffered. She's had to lose her husband and strained relationships with their kids. And I almost felt bad that they put that one quote in from the one daughter about how Melanie is just going to, grow old and be miserable and alone. Just because, like, even though she did these kind of really bad things, it's obvious she's suffered. But then again, I'm not that girl and I didn't have to go through that. But as an outsider, I could see that, Melanie Pillman was pretty screwed up and did a lot of screwy things, but I didn't know if I felt like there was a need to continue to like beat her down anymore,
I completely agree with that. But just to go back to what you were saying earlier about Kim Wood, the strength and conditioning coach, I thought he was one of the stars of the show. I just thought he was, having never seen him on television before. I heard the name, but having never seen him on television before, just the bluntness of him regarding what do you think of Vince McMahon? Well, what do you do to a whore? or just being so just upfront about how these guys are playing in fantasy land. We're just trying to squeeze all the money out of it we can.
Yeah, he reminded me of Red from that '70s show.
Yes.
Yeah, if they ever do a biopic, get that guy to play him. But yeah, I always, when Meltzer talking about, Pillman getting in the business, he always mentioned Kim Wood, and yeah, that was the first time I'd seen him too. And yeah, he's a character.
Yeah, he was entertaining, a lot of energy, funny guy. Like he looks like he was made for wrestling himself.
Yeah, a different era, sure.
Yeah, no, I mean as far as his like promos, like maybe as like a manager, maybe he should have been the coach, for Mr. Perfect instead of John Tolos. There was at least I will say I'm not as worried about Brian Jr. just as far as like falling into like drugs and bad habits, just because it really is a completely different business as far as, in the 90s, dudes were dropping like flies every week. Like 1 week it's Louis Spicolli, the next week it's Bobby Duncombe Jr. It's like somebody was always passing away from that stuff.
Yeah,
it's a different business, and it just, when watching Brian Jr. on the show last night, it just made me wish that, I could go back in time and throw a baseball to him, and then take his stepdad that threw his game cue and just beat the crap out of him.
Yeah, it's really sad that he had to go through that, and I'm just glad that he's turned out as well as he has, and I hope he does well in the business.
Yeah, and like I said about Melanie, like, there's a lot of reasons for those kids to hate her, and so it's not really my place to be like, well, she's suffered enough. But as an outsider, I kind of feel that way, but I also know that they really went through a lot, and so she really could have probably stopped this stuff from happening. So there's probably a lot of hard and valid feelings there that they're going to have to process as the years go by.
Yeah.
One thought I had was, obviously it's so tragic what happened with not just Brian, but the family. And imagine what a Brian Pillman would be today. Like I said, like an hour or so back, a 32-year-old Brian Pillman in 2021 working for WWE as it is today, with the health programs that they have, the conditioning that they have, drugs certainly not being as much of a visible problem as they were in the 90s, certainly not the 80s. And I think, obviously he, but also his family would have such a better outcome. Then again, does the WWE get to this position? Does the WWE get to have this great overall health system, if not for the tragedies of Pillman, Eddie, Chris, and everyone else. So it's kind of like he paved the way in many ways, some of them good and some of them bad.
Yeah, really, really unfortunate. And it'd been nice if, really in hindsight, things should have been done much earlier by both of the big companies. And ECW was just as bad. Like, they had dudes dropping left and right, and they had drugs in the locker room regularly. That whole 90s culture, nothing was ever done until that, late 2000s, when the wellness policy was instituted, which I think happened. It was either after Eddie passed away or after Benoit passed away, but it was like right after one of those deaths.
Yeah, I think they tried to do something with Eddie, but they turned it up a notch after Chris because of all the national attention that got.
Yeah. Do you guys have anything else you want to say about Brian Pillman that we didn't touch on? Any things you want to talk about as far as he goes?
I'd like to maybe see him get inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame one day. I mean, I know his WWF career wasn't as good as his WCW, career, but if you look at some of the people that are already in it, I think there's a place for him.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
And it's always a complete body of work. They have people in there that, maybe never even wrestled for WWE.
Yeah.
I think that he's a great example of there is no type for this industry. His whole thing, the whole thing that kept him down for so long was his size. And yet here we are, I'm sorry, I can't do math. It's very late at the end of a very long week, but a very long time after his passing, and we're still talking about him in great detail. So he left his impact, even if he was working at a time in which his body size was a detriment.
Yeah. And I like the idea of him going into the WWE Hall of Fame, and obviously he would be someone. I mean, they've put, everybody and their brother in that Hall of Fame, and Pillman is a stronger candidate than many people they have put in there. And if they do put him in, I think it's like a must that they actually give him a formal induction. I think it would be a really bad look if they put him in as a legacy wing inductee.
Yeah, he's a name. They can sell tickets off him.
Even just going past the fact that he was a name, it's just everyone knows how he died and that he was working for them, and I feel like it would just come off badly if it was a legacy inductee. But he does have a name that I feel like you could put out there as like the, a guy on the actual show. Like, he could easily be, and you could bring in Brian Jr. to induct him, and I have no doubt that AEW would let.
You can have Steve Austin induct him, and that would sell more tickets.
That is true. I never thought about that. But you got to have Brian Jr. there, and I think AEW would allow it.
Oh, sure.
All right, I hope you guys are enjoying this show so far, and there is more to come with myself, Aaron Haulman, and Graham Cawthon. But right now, I want to cut away real quick to my conversation with Les Thatcher from earlier this week. All right, at this time, I'm joined by none other than Les Thatcher. Les Thatcher is someone that I am very familiar with because I was a huge fan of Smoky Mountain Wrestling when growing up. Smoky Mountain was my favorite promotion, and Les was the lead commentator for the last couple of years of the promotion. And more importantly than that, he was the host of the very memorable Night of the Legends ceremony, which I have watched over and over so many times. In addition, Les is a very accomplished wrestler. Very honored to have you with me today, Les.
Well, thanks for having me on, Shannon. And I know this week you're celebrating Brian Pillman, so it kind of fits in. And I started celebrating Brian back in 1998, and had no idea how those shows would grow to mythical proportions.
They certainly did, and I had the privilege of being at two of them. I was at the 2000 and 2001 Pillman shows, and I'm from Missouri, and so these were the only times in my life that I've been to Cincinnati. I went with my friend Aaron, and these were really some special, one-of-a-kind shows.
Yeah, they really were. Well, the crazy thing is it all started out, Shannon, as the thought was, when Brian passed, being a Cincinnati boy, and I'm born and raised there too, well, let's do a little something to celebrate Brian and raise some money for the family. So it was going to be this little show, little being the operative word. And the first year I wasn't really sure what was going to happen. And it started out that we ended up with Benoit and Jericho. And then, of course, Steve Austin was going to come because, he and Brian were friends and they had partnered at WCW. So, and then I'd been talking to Dave Meltzer, and he said, well, if you got somebody from ECW, and it really hadn't crossed my mind up to then, but then I remembered Brian had the short stint there too, and Chris Candido and I were buddies. At that point, I had never met Paulie, and so I called Chris, and so he worked that out, and so we hit the trifecta. And so that day of the show, we were the first show was in the Norwood Junior High School gym where Brian grew up and went to school. And that first day, I was, wasn't sure what we were going to have. And it started to drizzle rain. And then, I said, oh my God, what's this going to? And before the day was over, we had a line of people around the building in the rain, waiting to get in. We turned away at best count over 400. We had 1,300 in the building, and they were jam-packed. And so that was the start of the whole thing. And, we had no idea how it was going to draw. But there, that was the way it started.
And there really was nothing else like it at the time, to where you can go to one event and see wrestlers from all of the different big companies. It was really something very unique, and it really shows, how valued Brian Pillman was to people, for them all to come together like this.
Yeah, and I felt good that the three main federations trusted me enough that, to handle their talent all under one roof, because that was, even a bigger challenge. It would have been someplace else, I think, But that was the unique thing about these shows is you could not see WCW, WWF, and ECW talent all in the same building on the same night anyplace else in the country. And so I remember I got about 2 hours sleep the night after the first show, and then back to the hotel and started hauling people back to the airport. And I remember going back to our gym, HWA, and I sat at my desk and about half asleep, and I thought, wow, we really had scored. We'd done something special. And should we do this again? Yeah, let's try another one. I had no idea how big it would grow or how far it would go, So it was just rolling the dice to see what was going to happen.
And in my first experience, like I said, was the 2000 Pillman show.
That's the big problem with technology across the board.
Absolutely. As I started to say, it looks like we're back up and running now. My first experience with the Pillman shows was the 2000 event. And, you had Diamond Dallas Page against Shane Douglas. You had, D'Lo Brown and Eddie Guerrero against Perry Saturn and Dean Malenko. The match I was actually most looking forward to was Tim Horner against Tom Pritchard, because I was such a big fan of Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Right.
And this was the first time I really got to see either of those guys live, because I was from Missouri. But my big takeaway from that show was when I saw the Chris Benoit Steven Regal match. I know at that time I thought that was the best match I'd ever seen live.
Yeah, and it's a classic. I mean, it's a timeless classic. That I use it as a teaching tool. And I was going to say, if you thought any other match was the highlight of that show, you really hadn't been paying attention. Yeah, that the crazy thing is when I booked all those shows and put the matches together. So a couple kids said, Regal and Benoit, and I said, yeah, why are you having that match? I said, bring a pencil and paper, you're going to school. And if you watch it, and if you try to understand the psychology of professional wrestling and the art of the work, they, like I say, Tom Pritchard, I know several of the trainers around the country use that as a teaching tool. And had Chris not had the neck surgery, which is the only reason he was prevented from being in all four of the main events for all four Pillman shows. After that, I knew the title for the fourth show for 2001. It was going to be Pillman 01, Benoit Regal, The Return. And I was going to build it all over on that. And of course, Chris had neck surgery, and we couldn't do that in drought.
Yeah, and the 01 show had a great lineup as well, and I remember the Hardy Boys were there, and Edge and Christian, and kind of like the first show I went to, the match I was most looking forward to in this case was Bobby Eaton, who's one of my all-time favorites, against Terry Taylor, who I'm a big fan of as well, and Bobby had Jim Cornette with him, and I was real excited for that one, and I don't remember if it was the 2000 or 2001 event, but I know one of them. I still have the picture that I took with Chris Benoit, because there used to be these meet and greets before the show.
Right.
And I remember you guys would do these live auctions in the ring as well.
Yeah, we auctioned off J.R. Stetson, woman's gown, I think a pair of Benoit's boots. I mean, we had all sorts of, donations from different wrestlers and different things that we auction off. And another cool thing is Joe the Belster, the guy that designed and made the spinning belt for WWE, right? The one that,
right.
I guess you'd say Cena made legendary, if that's what you want to call it. Anyway, Joe made a belt for us to raffle off every year for the Pillman starting in 1999. And he copied the face of the belt, the main plate of the belt, after the design for the T-shirt that year. And we raffled those off, but he also made Brian Jr. a copy of that same belt, only in a child size. And just so many cool things. Well, you mentioned, it started first year Polaroid with the Stars, and that was Austin, Sonny, Jericho, Benoit, Al Snow, Candido, and we had such a glut of people wanting Polaroids and stuff. Is the guys, all the stars, they stayed after the show to finish that up. So that grew until I think the final year. I think we had like 8 lines set up at one time to get Polaroid with the Stars. And these events, they grew so big as those last couple of years, everything started at noon. I mean, that was the Polaroids and everything. Then what we called the Independent Showcase started at 5:30, and that went till 7:30. And then basically the main show from there. Plus, as you mentioned, we had several times breaks and the auction. And it was a long day for everybody, but I don't think at any time anybody ever complained about it, truthfully.
Right. I mean, it was a lot of fun. And you mentioned the kind of, the first several matches were the HWA matches. And I was looking at the lineups to kind of refresh myself. And I saw that Randy Orton was on the 2001 show. And of course, I didn't know who Randy Orton was at the time. I knew, of course, Bob Orton Jr., and I knew his opponent, Flash Flanagan from Smoky Mountain, because he was there towards the end of that. But yeah, I had no idea I saw Randy Orton at one of these shows.
Yeah, sure. Well, Cena was at that 01 show, as were Rosie and Umaga, only they weren't Rosie and Umaga. They were Maddie and Eddie. They were the Island Boys. The Haas brothers were there. Yeah, I mean, well, the guy you see as Blade on AEW today, Pepper Parks, was there. So yeah, a lot of the talent that was just, well, you mentioned HWA, but the independent showcase was HWA, OVW, plus some of the better independent guys, from other areas. But yeah, it was. I mean, it was. You're right. It each year I was excited, and each year seemed to bring something just a little special, a little different. And of course, the first year just being the first year, as it were. The second year, Mark Curtis, 99. Mark had stomach cancer, and he was slated to referee. Well, he could have refereed any match he wanted to, but he was going to referee the main event, which was Benoit and Malenko against Conan and Ray Ray. And so a few weeks before the show, his wife called me at the gym, and she, said, I'm taking him back into the hospital. He's, we need to get his weight back up. But they were feeding him through a port at the time. And he's in the background yelling over Pam's talking to me, tell Les I'll be there. I'm not going to miss the show, and and all that. And I said, just tell him to take care of himself. So that he showed up for the show, and of course had been sick. And so I said, look, I don't want you to go out there and stress yourself out with this main event and the tag match and all. Why don't you referee? It was going to be Terry Taylor and Tom Pritchard. That was in '99. The Legends match, and referee that. So he did, and I was doing the ring announcing in '99. And so we're running for the main event, and here comes Mark Curtis. And he got in the ring, and I said, what are you doing out here? He said, I'm going to referee. I said, you sure you're going to be all right? He said, yeah, I think so. He said, are you staying out here and watching the match? And I said, yeah. He said, well, if I can't make it, you can always carry me in the back, can't you? I said, yeah, I can do that. So, but it was just, he had the heart of a lion. I mean, he was the toughest man, pound for pound, I ever met in my life, and I loved him like a brother. But that was special. And then you mentioned the Benoit Regal match, and that was 2000. I mean, that match has become legendary, and it should have. And then in 01, Dean Malenko announced his retirement. So
yeah, I just wanted to say about Mark Curtis. He's one of those guys that nobody has ever said a bad word about. And I remember when I was 16, WCW came to Kansas City at the Memorial Hall, and it was January, and it was snowing. It was really cold. And, we were a bunch of kids waiting outside to try to get some autographs. And, every wrestler just kind of drove past us. And Mark Curtis and Nick Patrick stopped and actually spent a few minutes with us. And I remember telling Mark that I liked watching him in Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And he was like, yeah, not too many people know about that. And just a great guy.
Yeah, he was. He was. Everybody loved him. I know. Jericho, Guerrero, Malenko, Benoit, myself, Al Snow. I mean, yeah. I mean, he was. You're right. I've never heard anybody say a bad thing about him, and I don't know how they could. I really don't. But yeah, all those shows were special, and I feel so proud of everybody that. I mean, realize the talent worked for nothing, and the big star guys realized they were on their day off, so they flew in and spent the day off wrestling for nothing. I mean, we put them up in the hotel. Their companies paid the plane fare. We chauffeured them in and out from the airport. Saw that they had a gym to work out, fed them, put them up in a hotel, and but they worked for nothing. And the volunteers, the committee that helped organize this whole thing with me, we met on Mondays in the gym. We started. Well, the first year was flying blind, and Lord, we were as confused as anybody could be. But from that point forward, we had a committee of about 9 people. And we met every Monday at the gym, starting 7 months out from the shows. So, I mean, it was, for us, it was a big production. And, but yeah, everybody just stepped up and worked their rear ends off. Again, I'm so proud of the shows, of the people that put it all together. And I'm really, I haven't seen the complete 4-disc set in completion myself yet. And watching, the trailer that Joe put out with the little flash frames from all the different shows, I'm anxious to get a copy and see it myself.
I watched the trailer today and it looked amazing. Tell me how the DVD release kind of came about, because this is like the 20-year anniversary of the final Pillman show.
Yeah, well, you know what? It just kind of fell into this. We might have put it out earlier. Actually, the thought was maybe to get it out for Christmas release last year. And it's just one thing and another where we ran into, not any roadblocks. It was just, we want to get a couple more, sound bites from different guys that were on the show or one thing or another. And then toward the end, Joe's graphic artist came down with COVID. And so we were sweating bullets that it wasn't going to get out for this, but it fell into the Dark Side of the Ring thing and the anniversary and the whole thing. So it really fit. And like I say, I'm excited for it. It's Joe has just done a hell of a job with the little teases he's been putting out for the last few weeks. And and the artwork on the covers are just I'm excited about it. And the great thing, I think, Shannon, is most of this footage has never been seen. I mean, if you were at 2 shows, so you saw those shows, but it's if you weren't there, you weren't there. I mean, there's been some bootlegs out, and stuff like that, but never anything like this with sound bites and interviews from Christian and Jericho and Mark Henry and Pepper Parks, Blade and Shark Boy and Brian Jr. and I sit down here at my place and kick around some stories about it, because realize he playing around with Rey Mysterio in the ring and the boy stuff like that. And Ray and Conan took him to the ring as their second the night of '99 and stuff like that. So for a kid, that had to be an exciting time. So anyway, it's more than just wrestling matches. It's emotion. It's when a bunch of guys, and that was to sit and watch those matches. There was never any talk that I'm aware of in the dressing room, like, I'm going to have a better match than you, but it was competitive to a certain degree, right? And the crazy thing, everybody busted their ass, to be quite frank. On the first year, Terry Taylor, came to the show just out of curiosity, and Terry and I go way back. I helped break him in back years ago, right here in Knoxville territory. But anyway, we're sitting up the bleachers watching Benoit and Jericho in the main event, and he said to him, these guys work harder for you for nothing than they do for us for a payday. But that was, it was true. These guys, nobody went out there and dogged it. Nobody. Everybody went out there and put out. Well, you were there. You witnessed 2 of those shows. Did you see anybody dogging it?
Absolutely not. And they were great. And I can tell you, I can co-sign on what you said about the artwork of the DVD cover, because it is amazing. Yeah,
at first, the Brian Pillman and a little bit of the character. I thought he had taken it off the 99 T-shirt logo, and it is, the artwork is, because the 99 T-shirt was done in the Bengals colors. Because Kim Wood, if you've watched The Dark Side, Kim was the Bengals strength coach and a mentor, to Brian in his early years. So, but yeah, that's I'm tickled to death of the whole thing, and I think anybody that's where are you going to see this group of people? Well, you mentioned Orton and Cena were yet to be seen as stars anywhere. Right. On that 2001, they were still in OVW at that time. So yeah, it was. And again, stars and stars of tomorrow, stars of the current, and some of the auction footage is in there, and some of the stuff I haven't seen. Joe took all my VHS tapes and disc, and I just had accumulated so much, and I'd never seen all of it myself. And so, like I say, I need to buy a copy so I can see what I'm missing.
So where can people go to purchase the DVD? I'm going to make sure I put a link here in the video as people are watching. They probably see it right now whenever they're watching this. But where can they go to purchase this?
Well, you can go to pillmanshow.com, which has some more information other than just to purchase that. It's a 4-disc set and over 15 hours of content. Like I say, interviews of the stars that were there, the matches, up at the auction, the whole 9 yards. Joe and I do the voiceover. Brian Jr. and I guess that's sort of at the beginning of the thing. He and I sitting down here in my living room. But you can go to joe-dombrowski.com, or you can go to prowrestlinglibrary.com. You can get it, the 4-disc set, or you can get it streaming or digital as well.
All right, there you hear it, guys. Go pick up your Pillman DVD sets. You see the info on your screen right now. These are special, one-of-a-kind events. Get them while they're available. Awesome DVD covers on this. Go check out the trailer.
It's great that you guys are celebrating Brian, and he certainly was special and unique, and I think anybody gets the 4-disc set will enjoy that, and I wish you guys well in the rest of your show too.
Well, I appreciate your time, Les, and yeah, I certainly encourage everyone to go pick up these DVDs, and thank you for putting on those shows and not only being so thoughtful of the family, but giving wrestling fans something to really remember and celebrate.
Well, thank you, and believe me, it was a labor of love, and enjoyed going down memory lane with you, Shannon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time, Les, and you have a good evening, okay?
You too.
Let's move on to the Brian Pillman Memorial shows. Aaron, I know that I went to 2 of these events with you, but you went to others that I was not at, and your memory of these shows is really better than mine. Go ahead and start the process of telling me some of your memories of the Brian Pillman Memorial shows.
Yeah, so the first one was in 1998, I believe in April. So it would have been about 6 months after Brian passed away. And that was the only one that I didn't go to because I wasn't aware that it was happening. I didn't have internet at the time. And yeah, I didn't know about it. I'm sure if I did, I would have went. I know a few people that did go to the first one and got pictures with Steve Austin. He went to the first one, and he was the biggest star in wrestling in '98. So to be able to meet Stone Cold, I mean, that was cool for the people that got to do it. I don't believe the first one was nearly as big as the ones that would precede it. I think there was only 6 matches. The main event was Chris Benoit versus Chris Jericho. I know Al Snow wrestled Chris Candido. and I'm sure he talked about it. But the Pillman shows featured talent from the big WWF, WCW, ECW, as well as independent wrestlers and name wrestlers who weren't affiliated with the big three at the time. And so there was never any like inter-promotional matches. You didn't see WWF guys versus WCW guys. They all stayed within their own promotions. But yeah, the first one I didn't go to. The one in 1999 was my first one. My sister's friend Aaron, I think, told me about it. She lived in Cincinnati. She was a wrestling fan. So she invited me to go with her and a friend of hers. And prior to the show, they did a meet and greet with some of the wrestlers that were on the show. And I can't remember exactly how much it was to get for, like, you had to have like a ticket for, each person that you wanted to see. But I remember it being pretty reasonable, like maybe even like $10. So we go into the building where it's at, and the first wrestlers that I meet were Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and a woman. And looking back now, it's kind of sad. But oh, by the way, these were Polaroids, because this was pre-digital camera, pre-cell phone. So they took Polaroids, got that way. And then the next person that I met was Ric Flair. And right as I'm going to meet Flair, Missy Hyatt walks in the room. So obviously Flair's distracted by her, and rightfully so. Missy looking only as Missy can. So I shook Rick's hand and said hi, and he, but like I said, he was focused on Missy. I don't know if she rode Space Mountain that night, but Missy, you can't be first, but you can be next. But so anyway, and after that, I met Mick Foley for the first time. I've met Mick probably 4 or 5 times, but this was the first time. And he had Mr. Sacco on his right hand, and I think a lot of people probably, when they got their picture with Mick, he would hold up Mr. Sacco, but I shook his hand during the picture, so I was actually crushing Mr. Sacco. And then I wanted to meet Al Snow, and he had left before I got to meet him. And this was like kind of like a running joke about not getting to meet Al Snow, because there was another time he did a first day ticket sales for SmackDown at the Nutter Center, but it was a blizzard, so I didn't get to meet him. And then I remember I went to a convention in Louisville, drove all the way down there. I didn't get my ticket in advance. Go to get my ticket. Fire marshals not letting any more people in. Didn't get to meet Al that time. So it's just one of these days I'll meet him. But I had like one ticket left. And I ended up meeting Road Dogg, who I didn't know at the time, but I would wrestle him 2 years later. But he was nice. But I remember Rey Mysterio and Conan, they were there. Ricky Steamboat was there. Ricky was sitting down, and I walked behind him, and he kind of like looked over, and so maybe I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, those are the people that I got to meet, and so it was really cool. And then this was at the Cincinnati Gardens, so it was a nice little size arena. It's where I believe I don't know if they're still around, but the Cincinnati Mighty Ducks play there. But the show itself, from what I remember, was good. A lot of talent from HWA, the Heartland Wrestling Association, which was the premier independent promotion in Ohio, in the Midwest at that time. They did a cruiserweight tournament. Shark Boy, I think, won, if I recall. But like Mick Foley wrestled D'Lo Brown. I think Al Snow wrestled Road Dogg, or maybe no. I think Mick wrestled D'Lo, and maybe Al Snow wrestled Road Dogg. One of those combinations. But I remember the main event was Rey Mysterio and Conan against Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko. And Conan and Rey Mysterio actually ended up winning that match. But that was the main event. And I remember Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat came out at one point, talked to the crowd, and they did raffles. They raffled off items of course, all the proceeds went to Melanie Pillman and Brian's children. And I remember hearing rumors that maybe that Flair and Steamboat wanted to have a match at one of the Pillman shows, but it never happened. But overall, that show in '99 that I went to was a good time. And then, yes, you and I went to the next year's Pillman Memorial, 2000.
Yeah, and you obviously remember more of it than I do, but I remember being excited for the show just because of the mixture of talent, and they had Tim Horner was going to wrestle either Tom Pritchard or Terry Taylor, one of the two, and I was like looking forward to that because it was like my Smoky Mountain guys.
Yeah.
But I remember that the big thing was this was the night that Chris Benoit and Steven Regal had their great match that all of us remembered from that night.
Yeah, that match was featured on Chris Benoit's DVD that came out in 2004.
Yeah, I used to have that. I think it was called Hard Knocks.
Yeah, and so at least some people who didn't go to the show got to see it. Of course, now with the anthology set that's been released, people can see it that way as well. But I remember the meet and greet prior to the show, and I don't know if you remember this, but when we got there and we were walking to the building where the meet and greet was at, someone walked by us and complimented you on your Rock and Roll Express t-shirt. Do you remember who that was?
Oh, geez. I do not remember.
It was Shark Boy.
Ah, okay.
I actually have the picture. I took a picture of him, and I like your Rock and Roll Express shirt. But so yeah, then we went. It was kind of the same deal as the first show that I went to, where you go in the building and you get your tickets, and you wait in line for whoever you wanted to get a picture with, and I got a picture with Shane Douglas and Disco Inferno. They were both nice. I got a picture with Justin Credible, and he was really nice. Then I met Raven, and it was a little different story. I went up to him, and I said, nice to meet you. And I like watching you wrestle, and nothing. He just stood there like a statue, didn't say a word. You can see, I'm sure I'll send you the photos, and you can put it on the video. You can just see the look of disappointment in my face. As
you were a big Raven fan at the time, I recall.
I did at the time. After that, not so much. No, but if you remember, 2000, I don't think was. It wasn't a good time. He was battling some demons. So, yeah, disappointing. I think if I met him today, it would be a different story. I think he would probably be.
But see, now today you're battling some demons, so
maybe I would snub him. But it wasn't.
And I'm just joking, everybody. I'm just joking. Aaron doesn't have any demons.
But it wouldn't be the end though of him sticking the screws to me that day, because the next person I met, the last person that I met, was Diamond Dallas Page. And I get up to the front of the line. I'm ready to go up, get my picture taken with him. And who strolls on over but Raven? And so he starts talking to DDP, and I'm just kind of standing there. Yeah, what can I do? I can't say, "Hey, Raven," "Hey, I'm up next, buddy." So I just had to wait there. And DDP was doing this thing where, like, he would put people in the diamond cut. Well, like, I guess kind of like a cravat.
Yeah.
I didn't want that. I don't really like the goofy photos too much. I just kind of wanted to shake his hand or whatever. So Raven finally leaves. I go up. Before I even really get to say anything, boom, he's got me in the cravat. Hey, how you doing, kid? Boom, take the picture. I'm on my way. Like, what the? You can see again. You can see in this picture the look of disappointment on my face. But you met some people too.
Yeah, you sent me some pictures that I did not remember taking until I saw them and realized I hadn't seen these pictures in years.
Yeah. That was the next show. That was 2000.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But you did meet 3 people at the 2000 show.
And from what you sent me, I believe it was Billy Kidman, Tori Wilson, and Benoit.
Yes.
And Benoit is the one picture that I had kept all these years. And I had forgot about all these other people that I had met during those shows.
Yeah, and I remember because I was standing off to the side while you got your picture with Benoit. And you were looking away. You were talking to someone. And Benoit was like checking out your Rock and Roll Express T-shirt, and I like to think he approved, because I remember he'd worked with the Rock and Roll Express, so I'm sure he probably had a favorable opinion of them. I also recall Kevin Nash was there at the meet and greet, and he had a little too much of the bubbly. He was intoxicated. I think he did a Tommy Rich impersonation for you, or
yeah, he pointed at my really, it was kind of a shitty Rock and Roll Express iron-on T-shirt.
Yeah,
and he points to it and he goes, "Look at this shirt. Somebody say something about getting fired up."
No, Kevin, you're just drunk.
Right. He's getting his 1980s Southern baby faces mixed up.
Yeah. But yeah, so that was the meet and greet that year was a mixed bag, for me, anyways. But yeah, for the show, the Benoit Regal match, that was the highlight. That was the match that most people were talking about afterwards. I believe at the time Regal wasn't employed with WWE. I think they'd already released him, but that was the match that kind of got him rehired, because they're like, wow, Regal can still go, and he's so that was the match that kind of helped kind of restart his career in WWE. I also remember the main event was D'Lo Brown and Eddie Guerrero against Chris Benoit and Perry Saturn. That was the main event for that show. But yeah, that was a good time. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. So that finishes out the Pillman shows?
Well, we went to the one the following year in 2001. Gotcha. And we went with Chris Hero and my buddy Tim.
And it's funny because I didn't even remember that. I remember that because we had went to see your match with Road Dogg. Was that same weekend?
It might have been.
Because I'm pretty sure, because I remember you were wrestling Road Dogg. It was the only IWA Mid-South show I went to. And I remember when we first walked into the barn or whatever the fuck you call it that they had these shows at.
Yeah.
I remember Hero and CM Punk were practicing a springboard, like on opposite sides of the ring, where they would springboard to each other in the middle. I think it was Hero and Punk, but it was at least Hero. And I remember they did a spot like this later in the night, and it was actually a really good show. But I remember that we went to Steak and Shake with Hero, but I did not remember that he went to the Pillman show with us too.
Yeah. He and Tim were there, and I remember we sat up in the stands, and there was some juggalos sitting nearby that were loud and obnoxious. But I remember you took part in the meet and greet. I didn't do the meet and greet that year, but you got to meet some big names.
Yeah. You sat out a bit because of the you were doing the wrestling thing, and it gets kind of weird when you start wrestling. You don't want to seem like you're quote unquote a mark. So there's a kind of like a dynamic that's kind of put upon you that you need to kind of separate yourself from that. And some people won't even go to shows if they're not booked on them.
Yeah.
But of course I wasn't wrestling. What's that?
Dennis Stamp? Not booked.
Right.
Yeah.
But of course I wasn't wrestling at the time and wouldn't for another 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I did the meet and greet, and you sent me the pictures. I had forgotten I got to meet Lord Steven Regal, Matt Hardy and Lita, Edge and Christian. I didn't have these pics anymore, and until you sent them to me, I forgot all about them. So
yeah. And you saw some sunny days.
But that was after the show. Oh, okay.
That's another story for another podcast. I would.
Yeah.
I would have.
I'm completely joking. If anybody's taking this seriously.
Yeah. I think though I would get to meet later everyone. Well, most of the people I think that you met. Edging. Well, met Christian at the Charlotte Fan Fest that one year. Was it 2007? I think. I met Edge at a big autograph charity event. Met Sonny and Chris Candido on an IWA Mid-South show. Met Regal at a book signing he did in Columbus in 2005.
Yeah, and that's in a podcast episode I did a few weeks ago with Graham. I showed that book that you had gotten me autographed.
And when I met Regal, I brought up the Pillman Memorial show, and I told him, the match with Benoit was probably the best match I ever saw in person. He was looking down signing, and when I said that, he looked up and he's like, "That was a magical night." So yeah, I got to meet Lita at an autograph and Matt Hardy at a Ring of Honor show, and eventually get to meet all. Just not at the 2001 Pillman show. But I remember there was a lot of OVW talent on that show because this was 2001, so OVW was going. I believe there was an afternoon show that we didn't go to, and I believe on that show, John Cena wrestled Randy Orton, which had to have been probably, I don't know if it was the first time, but it was probably one of the first times they wrestled. And Cena this was maybe his second, third year in the business. Orton probably hadn't even been in 2 years. But the show that we went to, I remember the main event, and it's kind of funny, except for the first show, every main event was like a tag match, or in this case, it was a triple threat because it was the Hardys against Edge and Christian against DDP and Canyon. I remember that was a good match.
I remember really liking that they had Bobby Eaton against Terry Taylor, and
Yes.
Bobby had Jim Cornette with him, and that was the match that I was most excited for, obviously. And I mentioned that when I was talking with Les Thatcher on Monday.
Yeah, and I believe Ricky Steamboat was like the special guest referee or ringside enforcer.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, I believe he was.
Yeah, but yeah, that was a good show, and that was the final Pillman Memorial show. They only did 4, and yeah, I'm glad that I got to go to 3 of them, and we got to go to 2 of them together. So, and like the anthology set that just came out. I checked earlier, and I think you can get a digital copy too.
I sent you a link. I thought either today or yesterday I think it's prowrestlinglibrary.com.
Yes, yeah, that's Joe Dombrowski's. It's like kind of like a streaming, like independent wrestling streaming service. So it's on there too if you don't want to go the DVD route. But I think there's over like 14 hours of content and some documentaries and interviews in addition to the shows. So definitely something to check out.
All right, there you have it. We heard from a lot of great people on this episode. My friend Aaron Haulman and Graham Cawthon, thank you for joining me today. And thanks to Marc Mero and Jimmy Calhoun for sending in videos to be used on this show. And thank you to Les Thatcher for talking with me about the Pillman Anthology set. So make sure you keep tuning in. A lot of more fun episodes coming up, and you don't want to miss it. So stay tuned to the Read This podcast.